Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode, we're walking in Memphis. The topic of this Walking in Memphis, CWA Wrestling from March 8th, 1986. Before we get into the review, if you want to check out the video I reviewed for this show, it's going to be down here in the description. Also, if you haven't seen my shows before, I grade everything on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is the worst, 5 is the best. For Walking in Memphis, we go from commercial break to commercial break, segment to segment. So everything that's within that segment is considered part of the ring. With all that being said, let's jump right into this. We start off with a match. We have Benny Trailer going up against Dirty Rhodes. I thought this was a good match and a good way to start the show. If you haven't seen Dirty Rhodes, obviously he's a play on Dusty Rhodes. This was a good match, a good opener, a good way to get your crowd hyped without giving too much story away right off the bat. Dirty Rhodes picks up the win here. I'm giving this one a 3. We get a local promo with JD Costello and the Mod Squad, which is Spike and Basher. Kind of cool little promo here. I think JD Costello is one of those guys that is kind of lost to history. For everything I can remember, he's only done work in Memphis and CWA. So to me, he's kind of got lost, but he's a good speaker, a good manager. He would fit really well with this generation because he has that quality where he could be a little bit firmly tongue-in-cheek while still believable. That's followed up with an interview between Dutch Mantel and Eddie Marlin, which looks to be at either Dutch or Eddie's house. They talk about Dutch Mantel splitting off from his friend Bill Dundee and Buddy Landell, and how Buddy Landell had changed Bill Dundee and made Bill Dundee act more like Buddy Landell. Whereas previously, Bill Dundee would hang out with Dutch, they would go to dive bars, they would chew tobacco and listen to country music. This was a really good promo. I've said it a million times. Out of all the wrestlers in Memphis, Dutch Mantel is probably my favorite that's Memphis-centric. There have been guys that have obviously came in and out that have wrestled other places, but for someone that's so ingrained in the Memphis product, Dutch is probably my favorite. That leads us right into a match with Dutch Mantel going up against Jerry Garman. Dutch picks up a pretty solid, fast win here. For that whole segment, the Mod Squad promo, the Dutch and Marlin interview, the Dutch match, I'm giving this all a 4. I thought it was pretty good. Next up, we have a match. It's Bill Dundee and Buddy Landell. They're going up against David Johnson and Jim Jameson with a referee, and he was a referee in the first match. I don't remember if he was a ref in the Dutch Mantel match, but this is going to come to note in a minute here. Jeff Jarrett. Jeff was, as I said on commentary, 18 years old and just graduated high school the year before. So it's a very young Jeff Jarrett. This was, and spoilers, this was basically the angle that brought Jeff into actually becoming a wrestler. So we're seeing almost 40 years ago, Jeff started his wrestling journey, and he's still wrestling now. And I would say at a pretty high level. You can argue that maybe the story he's in with him and Jay Lethal and Sanjay Dutt and Satnam Singh isn't the greatest story, but you can't argue with Jeff as a personality, Jeff as a wrestler. For a guy that's almost 40 years into it, and if I'm doing my math right, in his late 50s, mid-50s here, he's one of the top wrestlers they got in the company, in my opinion. Jeff gets a lot of flack for his TNA run, and I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but if you really look at it, go back and watch. Other than Jeff Jarrett, there were guys that could have been on the top, but he was right there with them. You're telling me that Jeff Jarrett wasn't as good as AJ Styles, and I know, don't come at me, or Kurt Angle, or Raven, or Rhino, or some of the other guys that were pushed to the top of TNA. Jeff was just as good, if not better, than most of those guys, and I think he got a lot of flack for being the owner, or part of ownership, or part of management, which I think is undeserved. Back to the match. Dundee and Landell pick up the win here. Afterwards, they attack Johnson and Jameson, which Jeff Jarrett tries to stop. While they're trying to stop him, they attack Jeff Jarrett, which brings out his father, Jerry Jarrett. Jerry comes out. They try to attack Jerry Jarrett's good eye, which is great that they brought this up on commentary for people that may not have known. If you weren't a longtime fan or you may not have heard the story, Jerry Jarrett only has one good eye. So it was great that they brought that in there and let you know why it's so important that these guys are going for his eye. That brings out Eddie Marlin and also Dutch Mantel. So the battle lines are obviously drawn. Dundee, Landell versus Jarrett's, Eddie Marlin, and Dutch Mantel. And if you're not familiar, Eddie Marlin is Jeff Jarrett's grandfather. He's Jarrett's wife's father. For that whole segment, I'm giving that a 5. I thought it was a fantastic piece of work. Great storytelling, all within the premise of a wrestling match. It was so organic and it felt real and it felt important. And you believed that everybody involved wanted to be in the role that they were involved in. I thought it was fantastic. Like I said, I'm giving it a 5. That's followed up with a match with the Fantastics, Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton, going up against Keith Eric and Tony Faulk. Before we start the match, Jarrett comes out and he's holding up a towel to his eye, and he's basically breaking down and crying and saying he doesn't know what to do. If you're not familiar, Jerry Jarrett, was the booker / promoter for the company. That also brings out Eddie Marlin, who says, "This is the first time Jerry hasn't known what to do, but I know what to do. And I'm calling Jerry the King Lawler. I'm going to end his suspension. I'm going to bring him back so he can fight against these guys." Then we go right into the match, which is Rogers and Fulton going up against Keith Eric and Tony Faulk. This was all fantastic. Again, I love the work that they're doing here, the outline they're laying for the story, the team of the Fantastics, which I guess goes with my acronym there. They're just a great team and they're fun to watch. Keith Eric and Tony Faulk are two great enhancement / lower level talents. Tony Faulk would go on later to have a Boy George inspired gimmick, but this was a really fun match. The Fantastics pick up the win here. For that, I'm giving that segment a 4. After that, we come back and we have a promo with Bill Dundee and Buddy Landell, talking about why they did what they did, how Dundee hates Lawler, how Dundee got Lawler taken out of the company, how he hates the Jarretts. Landell chimes in too. This is a good promo. That leads us right into Dutch Mantel coming out for a promo, and Eddie Marlin also coming out to say, "Hey, I got the King, I got Lawler on the phone." So they patch up a speaker where Jerry Lawler is calling into the studio, so you get to hear Jerry Lawler chime in. Fantastic stuff here. Basically, Lawler and Dutch say, "We fought against each other, we fought with each other. I got your back if you got my back." Fantastic match, fantastic segment. That leads us right into the main event of the show. We get Thunderbolt Hamilton and David Haskins going up against the aforementioned Mod Squad. This is their debut match in CWA. They would go on to be a pretty well-received and pretty important team in the company. This was a really fun match. Mod Squad picks up the win here. For that, for everything we see, the promo with Dundee and Landell, the Dutch and Marlin coming out and talking to Lawler on the phone, which was fantastic. You know it's a good thing when someone is just talking by phone and you're drawn into it. For all that, for that whole segment, I'm giving it a 5. And if I didn't mention, the Mod Squad does pick up the win here. Overall, I thought this was an absolutely fantastic show. One of my favorites that I've watched since I started reviewing these, and I say that quite often, but some of them start topping other ones. This one, the Too Cool for School Jimmy Hart video one, are probably two of my favorites that are sticking out the most to me. I always love when we see younger talent like a Sid Vicious or Steve Austin pop up on the show, or even Raven, who popped up at one point. These are really fun capsules just to see how different territory wrestling was in one of the best territories in the country, and having the time differences between what I do, switching back and forth between CWA and USWA. USWA was more on the decline end of it, whereas CWA in the 80s was probably as hot as it ever been, as popular as the wrestling ever been in Memphis. So it's interesting seeing those little pockets. This is absolutely fantastic. Overall, I'm giving the show a 5. I think it was great. The stories that they were told, the people involved. I mean, we got some of the most classic wrestlers in Memphis wrestling. Jeff Jarrett, Jerry Jarrett, Bill Dundee, Buddy Landell, the Fantastics, Dutch Mantel, Jerry the King Lawler, the Mod Squad, who were an important part. They may not have had as big of a role as some of these other guys, but they definitely had an important role for the time they were there. This is an absolutely fun show. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I recommend you checking it out. With all that being said, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you made it all the way to the end, let's throw a Mod Squad in the comments. Let's give them guys some love. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and we've been walking in Memphis.